Hello, my name is Briar. Welcome to my channel where I'm talking about my writing journey. It is currently July and that means it is Camp NaNoWriMo. So this month I have really been super focused on my writing project, which initially started as a rewrite and has since devolved. You can see all of my update videos and everything that's been going on with that project on my channel if you want to check that out. However, today I decided to do something a little bit different, and because over the last couple months, I've been diving into trying to figure out why I write what I write, why I am motivated to write sometimes and not others, and trying to look into my own history with writing to build up my writing practice more, I guess. One thing that I did is a couple months ago, I looked through a lot of my writing projects that I've done in the past. And in doing so, I discovered a lot of projects that I now know I'm just never going to go back to. I'm never going to finish them. I'm never going to rewrite them. I just lost my joy in working on those projects, and so I'm just not going to work on them anymore. So I decided to make a video about the projects that I have abandoned, tell you a little bit about them, how far I got, what they are, and why I'm not working on those projects anymore. I have 5 novel projects that I have started at some point in the past 5 years, 6 years? I don't know. I have some novel projects that I've started in the past 7, 8 years that I started with the best of intentions. I got some part of the way into it and then I stopped for various reasons. So today I'm going to go through those 5 projects, outline the premise of the project, when I started it, when I stopped it, and why I'm never going back to it. Starting with project number 1. This one is a novel idea that I got a very significant amount done in. I call it the candle shifters. I'm honestly not sure where that candle thing came from, because I was writing this in NaNoWriMo 2016. This was the first Nano that I had attempted with great purpose and intention after graduating from university and joining the working world and doing all kinds of things like that. And so it was an interesting time in my life. It was probably not the best time to be writing, just honestly. So as you can tell from my working title of the Candle Shifters story, it was a story about shifters, specifically werewolf shifters. And it was a young adult novel about a girl who moves into a new town and discovers that a very large family that lives out in the woods is actually werewolves. And this family is like monitored by a coven of witches who have dark and dangerous ideas about what they're going to do with these shifter children as they grow up. It was basically like a boarding school for shifter children. Think like Professor X and the X-Men Mansion and the School for Gifted Youngsters in that series, but it's run by witches and the students are werewolves and everything is not as it seems, because they're secretly raising them up to be like sacrifices to some great demon or whatever. Yeah, the witches were evil in that story. Probably something that was why I wasn't going to be writing it too much. But the new girl who moves into town is secretly magical. She doesn't know it. She was adopted. Things go on. She meets the oldest teens who live in this werewolf house, and slowly they discover more about the danger that these children and everything is coming to a close as the witches get ready for their great sacrificial magic ritual. Yeah, there's a couple problems with this story. Namely, I started writing it for NaNoWriMo from the point of view of the oldest werewolf children in this house instead of the point of view of the new girl who's moving into town. So I had to find ways to explain everything that was happening in the story from the point of view of kids who have been living with this, and that was very difficult. And I discovered about 20,000 words in that I really should put it from the new girl's point of view, and that would make everything so much easier to explain. And also, it was a school for werewolves, so this school-ish thing had like 16 kids. And if you've watched any of my previous videos, you know I tried to give all of those kids their own personality, their own plot lines, their own stories, their own everything, and it was too big. And so I got about 20,000 words in writing it from the wrong point of view, switched it to the new point of view and got another 15-ish thousand words in, and realized that I was never going to finish it. It was too much and I abandoned it, and I haven't looked at that since. I had very negative feelings as I was writing it, and it's something that's too much for me to ever go back to. But I did write about 36,000 words of that story, so I got a pretty significant chunk in. It was just all the wrong words. The second story novel that I started was something that I was calling Balance, or more recently thinking about it, I called it like Witch's End, because it was about a coven of witches. These are common things in my stories, who one group when they were young tried to do a ritual and accidentally summoned a demon and released like all the evils of Pandora's box onto the world. And so this is like why the world is constantly slowly falling to corruption and greed and evil, and that's only become more relevant since I wrote this story. When I started writing, I had envisioned it as a short story about this group of teens who accidentally releases all the demons of Pandora's box, and the older witches in the family have to do something to be able to maintain or slow the spread of evil in the world. But I also had greater ideas of what could happen to this family that is now tied to a ritual that they have to repeat regularly in order to stop evil from taking over and winning and give good some sort of hope. So they have to do a ritual every year, couple years, what have you, in order to contain the evil as best they can so that they don't, lose the fight of good and evil. And slowly this witch family withers down, people leave, everything goes, poorly for this family because they are targeted by evil, because the evil things that they released want to be evil and not be stopped and contained. So this family is targeted, bad things happen, and slowly it withers down until it's just one woman and her daughter. And that's it. Those are the people who are trying to maintain this ritual upkeep of corralling the evil spirits of the world to allow good to have some sort of power. That became quite a larger thing than I had originally anticipated. It was no longer a short story, even though I'd only drafted it as a short story. I outlined it as what could have been a novel, but it got too big, it got too dark. The evils of the real world started getting too real for me, and I didn't want to continue writing about a story where this was all also relevant. Like, I like my writing to be an escape more so than a reflection of politics and evil. So I stopped writing that one, and that one was a short story that I did in April of 2018. I outlined it for another couple months, but I abandoned it in favor of a different, less real feeling story. But I did get about 8,000 words written of it as a short story, and a lot of words and ideas drafted for an outline, but didn't continue that. My third story is one that I was calling the Possessed Lesbians story. It was a story based on a girl in high school who, it's sort of like a soulmates kind of story. She has a dream about someone who she's never met before, and then that person comes in as a new person at school. They have to uncover how they know each other because they've both been dreaming about each other, and then these two girls fall in love and all of those things. But the new girl is also possessed by a demon who wants to, I don't even think I ever defined what the demon wants, but the demon is evil, obviously. So she's possessed, and they have to exorcise this demon from her so that they can have their happy ever after. And, bad things happen. This demon is sort of like a poltergeist ghost attached to this girl, and so her family has died, her friends have died, everyone's been in this terrible accident. She's at the center of it all, but can never be blamed for it. And then the two have to work together to exorcise this demon. This was a story that I mostly outlined. I had, I think, drafted the first 2 scenes or so, the first scene from each girl's point of view, and I had wonderful ideas of how this was going to go, but this was originally conceived in summer of 2019, and a lot was going on in my life at that point, and I didn't really want to delve into trying to make a romance horror demon possession story. It seemed too out of my understanding of the world, and I didn't want to work on that while simultaneously doing other things that I had to take care of in my real life. And so that one got shoved to the wayside, and as I'm going through all of my works, it's just something that I'm probably not going to go back to. So overall, that story had about 3,000 words in it for 2 scenes and like a vague outline. My fourth idea is something that I called royalty romance light magic thing. Yeah, these titles got more and more bizarre as I just sort of combined things together. This was an idea that I had conceived of during NaNoWriMo of 2019. So I was actually working on my science camp story that I'm currently working on for Camp NaNoWriMo right now, but I had this idea in the middle of the month, and so I jotted it down and saved it and started working on it in December and January that year. This was conceived of as a royal romance. Again, why did I have so many romance stories? There's a reason a lot of these are abandoned, but this was conceived of as like a royal romance where a girl who has failed her magical training to be a sorcerer has returned back to the city where she's from, and everyone's expecting her to be able to do great magic, but she failed all of her classes and has spent the last couple of years working as a servant at the magical school, telling her family that she was still learning magic, but she wasn't. And she gets back into town, and through a bunch of hijinks ends up being a companion to the prince, and everyone is saying that she should be falling in love with the prince, but instead she falls in love with the prince's female bodyguard. And so there's a lot of weird romance and tension there, but 2 things about this story did not make it long lasting for me working on it. Number 1, romance, still not my vibe, still not great. Number 2, royalty. I am not honestly the biggest fan of royalty and royalty romance style things, but I was in a phase where that sounded interesting to me, so I wanted to write about it, and I wanted to try it, and I tried it, and I got an outline, and I got the first scene written a couple of times, and I abandoned it. And now it's in this video. So that one, I probably only got like 3,000 words written of it total, because I was writing other things. It was in the middle of NaNoWriMo, and by the time I actually get into writing it, I lost whatever passion had driven me to write it in the first place. So that one didn't honestly get that far. And my final abandoned project, number 5, I called Magical Texas. This one was a bit more in the vein of magical realism, and it was more centered on family, which is things that I really enjoy writing about. Family, siblings, things like that. But it was also an adult fiction story, whereas everything else that I've mentioned so far is young adult. This was my first idea that I had conceived of as adult fiction. The premise of this story was a family who had moved to a small town in Texas where magic just sort of happened and was accepted, as that's just how it is, like in a magical realism story, like sometimes magic just happens. So they'd moved to this small town in Texas, and they discovered magic. Family things happened, they got torn apart, the siblings all went different directions, and their father was left behind in this small magical town. Over the course of time, they forgot about magic. They lost contact with everyone from their small town that they'd only lived in for a couple of months, and life went on for them until their father contacts all of them to come back before he dies as his deathbed wish. And so they all do a little road trip, remember all of the magical weird things that happened in this town on their way to this town, and by the time they get there, their father has died. So they have to figure out what it is that he had wanted to share with them. They're going through his belongings. It's this whole family reconciliation thing after they're all been separated for decades. And this one was highly influenced by me watching The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix over and over and over and over again at the beginning of 2020. So I had imagined it being like a timey-wimey where we're seeing them as kids and them as adults, and everything is sort of mysterious about what their father wanted to tell them, where the magic comes from and why they forgot, and all kinds of things like that. And it all just, that was the premise of the story. I had written a couple of scenes from them as adults and them as kids. I had written a couple of ideas about like magical things that they encounter. Like the youngest daughter in this story had a snowball that she'd kept even after leaving, that it had snowed in July in Texas, and they had a snowball fight with the neighbor kids, and everything was just like a joyous occasion, and she wanted to remember that joy, so she'd taken a snowball home and hid it in her room, and instead of what would have usually happened in that the snowball would melt and it would just be a mess, it had stayed as a snowball, and she had taken it with her through all of this, all of her time away, and it had always just been a snowball, like a real snowball that she kept in her things, and she could pack it, she could move it, she could take it anywhere, and it never melted. And that was like one of the biggest things that was like connecting all the stories, was this snowball. And I don't know exactly why I stopped writing this at the time, but it was early 2020, so there was a lot of things going on. But going back into this story, I still really love all of my characters and this idea of family divided and reconciling as adults. But similar to my Witch's End story, it's not really something that I want to write as escapism. It's not something that is bringing me joy to explore and write, because it's very stressful because of the whole family dynamics of it all. So I stopped working on that one, and I'm probably not going to work on it again, even though there are some scenes that I've envisioned for it that I really enjoy. It's probably just not something I'm going to put a lot of time towards. So I haven't written it. That one I probably only got about 3,000 to 5,000 words, and most of it being this scene written about this snowball incident, and everything else is just notes and outlines. So there's not a whole lot to go on there. And since 2020, most of my focus has been on reworking and reviving my 3 main projects, and last year working on a Halloween slasher, horror thriller, young adult romance. Why are all my stories romance? I don't even like romance. But that's what I have for these 5 abandoned works that I have started, envisioned, outlined, and stopped. If you're interested in any of these stories, I would love to know if you're going to pick something up or if you're inspired by any of these. And I'm thinking I might even do some more videos explaining in more detail about some of these ideas and giving more of an insight into my writing process with these ideas that I'm never going to continue, but that I did put a lot of time and energy into when I first conceived of them. So if that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments. Do you have works that you have completely abandoned? Most of mine I abandoned because either I started working on other projects, I was inspired by something that I'm no longer inspired by, or it got too real too quick, and I don't want to write things that are feeling too real to me at the moment. So maybe in a decade I might go back to some of those, but at the moment I'm not. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I would love to hear more about what you guys are up to. As I'm going through my writing notebooks, I'm still finding nuggets of stories that I just never wrote, and maybe I'll share more of those in the future. Let me know if this kind of video is interesting to you, and I will see you guys in my next one on Monday, maybe Thursday, but probably not. Thank you so much, and have a great day.